All right, so ready to dive in. We're taking a deep dive today into Hayao Miyazaki's new film, The Boy and the Heron.
Yeah, giant parakeets, mysterious towers, and more dreamlike sequences than you can shake a stick at. And we're diving in because the reactions have been fascinating.
Fascinating, yeah.
Some critics are calling it confusing, some a masterpiece.
Wow, that is a range. So it's like we're watching two different movies. For those who haven't seen it, The Boy and the Heron takes us to World War II, Japan.
Hmm.
Our main character, Mahito, he loses his mom in a bombing.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's really sad. And then his dad relocates them to the countryside to work in a fighter plane factory.
That detail, that factory detail, that feels very grounded in Miyazaki's work, don't you think?
Yeah,
The weight of war, the impact on industry, these are recurring threads in his films, for sure.
definitely. And then it gets even more complicated, layered, because his new stepmom is actually, wait for it, his aunt,
Oh, wow. Talk about family drama.
right? So we've got that going on, and then their new home,
Hmm.
this huge estate, and it's full of secrets.
Hmm.
A dilapidated tower whispers about a vanished great uncle. It's like Gothic mystery meets Ghibli.
It's true. You mentioned in your notes you found that Gothic element intriguing and kind of unexpected from Miyazaki.
Yeah, I did.
What was it that struck you about that?
Well, you're right. It is unexpected.
Yeah.
When I think Miyazaki, I think whimsical, fantastical, and those elements are definitely there in The Boy and the Heron.
Right.
The giant parakeets, the balloon animals
Yeah.
floating up to the moon. It's visually stunning, just classic Miyazaki.
Absolutely.
But this kind of darker, almost sinister undercurrent in the setting, that's new.
It is.
And I think it adds a layer of complexity we haven't really seen before in his work.
Yeah, I agree. And what's so interesting is some critics, they're saying that complexity, it extends to the storytelling itself.
Really?
So the animation, everyone agrees it's classic Ghibli, it's breathtaking, magical, all of that. But the story, that's where the debate begins.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and the criticism, it's not about the animation quality, it's about how the story actually unfolds. Some found it confusing, disjointed, even messy. And they're not wrong, it's definitely not a straightforward linear narrative.
Right.
However, on the other hand, some are calling it like fever dream storytelling, and they're praising its ambiguity.
That's so interesting because, this is the director who gave us Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro. Films known for their imaginative worlds, but also they're really clear emotional cores.
Absolutely, yeah.
This feels like a pretty big shift.
It does, doesn't it?
What do you make of that?
I think it's important to remember that Miyazaki, he's not a static artist, you know? He's
Right.
always evolving, he's experimenting, he's pushing boundaries. And at this point in his career, after decades of, captivating audiences, it kind of makes sense that he'd explore new ways of telling stories.
So you're saying this intentional ambiguity, it could be a sign of growth. Maybe Miyazaki's grappling with bigger, more complex themes that he ever has before.
It's definitely a possibility, and if we actually take a closer look at some of the themes that reviewers are picking up on, it might give us a clue as to what he's trying to do with this less conventional approach.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that because if anyone can find meaning in a giant parakeet, I think it's you. So one thing that really jumped out from your notes was how many reviewers mentioned loss when talking about The Boy and the Heron.
Right.
And not just like the loss of Mahito's mother, right?
Yeah.
But this feeling of being overwhelmed by change, like the whole world is just shifting under your feet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because this sense of overwhelming change, it isn't just like present in the narrative, you
Wow.
know. It's almost like woven into the fabric of the film itself.
Okay, so
Well, think about the way the story jumps between reality and fantasy, these often really abrupt transitions. It's,
yeah.
it's like mirroring that feeling of disorientation that, Mahito's experiencing.
So you're saying Miyazaki wants us to feel a bit lost, a bit, I don't know, off kilter, just like Mahito.
Exactly. It's like he's inviting us to literally to step inside Mahito's shoes and to experience the world through his eyes as he grapples with grief and, a new family and a reality that just keeps shifting between the mundane and the fantastical.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to that idea of fever dream storytelling. Have you ever had one of those dreams, where the logic is all messed up, where 1 minute you're flying and then the next you're like back in your childhood bedroom?
Oh, totally. My dreams are like a David Lynch film on fast forward.
Right, exactly. And so there's this similar kind of disjointed disjointed, dreamlike quality to The Boy and the Heron that I think is meant to evoke that same feeling of being unmoored, of trying to like piece together meaning from these little fragments, you know?
Which is a very different experience from, say, Spirited Away,
Yeah.
where, yeah, we're thrust into this totally bizarre, bathhouse for spirits. But the rules of that world, the emotional arc of the story, it's very clear.
Precisely. And that's why I think some critics they're drawing a parallel between this film and Miyazaki's own life.
Yeah.
You mentioned that one review that kind of linked the vanished great uncle to Miyazaki
Oh, I
himself.
did. Yeah, it's like the film isn't just about a, a boy dealing with loss,
Yeah.
but also maybe an artist grappling with their own legacy, their own mortality.
Hmm.
Maybe even that fear of being forgotten as they get older.
Yeah. And if you consider, Miyazaki's 82 now, he might be reflecting on his own mortality, his own artistic journey, right? And and then suddenly the film's unconventional structure, it starts to feel a little less like a flaw and more like a deliberate choice.
So you're saying it's almost like he's giving us a glimpse into his creative process,
Hmm.
his internal world, which, like the film itself, might not always be linear or easy to figure out.
That's a really interesting way to put it, actually, and I think it speaks to a much larger point about how we even approach art, especially art that kind of challenges our expectations,
Mm.
because there's this tendency, especially with animation, to want everything to be really neat and tidy, easily digestible.
Which makes sense in a way, right?
Right.
Because animation it's often seen as a genre for children,
Yeah.
even though, Miyazaki's work has always pushed against those boundaries.
Exactly. And I think with The Boy and the Heron, he's making a very conscious decision to move away from that expectation of neatness, of easy answers. He's asking us, the viewers, to kind of meet him halfway, to engage with the ambiguity, to sit with that discomfort of not having everything just spelled out for us.
Which might be why so many reviewers felt like they had to see it twice, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like you might discover new layers to a painting or a piece of music that you listen to over and over again. You might need those multiple viewings to fully appreciate all the nuances of this film.
Absolutely. It's like he's not giving us a finished puzzle. He's giving us this box of pieces and saying, here, you assemble it. You figure it out. And depending on your perspective, your own life experiences, you might come up with a completely different picture than someone else.
Hmm. That's a really fascinating point. So how do you think these multiple interpretations, this idea of the audience actively participating in creating meaning, how does that impact our viewing experience?
Well, for some people, it's incredibly rewarding.
Really?
That feeling of discovery, of putting together the clues, of having your own interpretation challenged and maybe even reshaped with each viewing. That can be really enriching. But for others, it can be frustrating. Some people, they want that clear narrative. They want that satisfying resolution, and The Boy and the Heron doesn't really give you that.
So it's a risk then, this deliberate ambiguity, this move away from more traditional storytelling.
Absolutely a risk, yeah, and it's a risk that not everyone is going to enjoy or appreciate, but I think it's a real testament to Miyazaki's his artistry, his willingness to just experiment, even at this point in his career.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, whether you connect with The Boy and the Heron on that emotional level, or you find yourself more, intellectually stimulated by its complexity, you can't deny that it's a film that really gets people talking.
Yeah.
And maybe in the end, that's the most valuable thing that art can do, right?
It's interesting you say that because one of the biggest talking points about the film seems to be its ending.
Oh, really?
And the general consensus is, well, it's abrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about that feeling of being dropped right into Mahito's world, the jumbled chronology, those sudden shifts between reality and fantasy.
Right, right.
But that ending seems to have really thrown people. Is it just the fever dream style taken to an extreme,
Mm-hmm.
or is there something more there?
You know, I think you've hit on something really important here because A few reviewers, they initially found the ending jarring, but then they had a change of heart after a second watch.
Hmm.
They started to pick up on how certain elements in that final scene, as weird as they seemed, they actually tie back to these themes of choice and acceptance that we see throughout the film.
So it's like those seemingly random puzzle pieces we were talking about earlier. They don't make sense at first, but once you've seen the whole picture, you can start to see how they actually fit, right?
Exactly. And I think that's where that comparison to Miyazaki's own life, it becomes even more interesting, you know? Think about it. If this is his final film, the culmination of a lifetime of storytelling, wouldn't it make sense for him to approach the ending with a sense of peace, of
Yeah.
acceptance? He's not trying to tie everything up perfectly. He's letting go.
Letting go of the need to please everyone,
Mm.
maybe, of that expectation that a film has to have a clear beginning, middle, and end.
Maybe, yeah. And in doing that, he's kind of inviting us to let go as well, to just embrace that ambiguity, to sit with the unanswered questions and to find our own meaning in the heron's flight.
That feels like a very Miyazaki thing to do, actually,
Mhm.
to leave us not with a bunch of answers, but with a sense of wonder, a desire to kind of revisit that world he created and find our own interpretations.
And isn't that what all great art does?
Mm.
It stays with us, it sparks conversations, it challenges us to see things differently. And even if The Boy and the Heron isn't, everyone's cup of tea, you can't deny that it's a film that really makes you think.
It definitely has given us a lot to unpack today. And I have a feeling that this is really just the beginning of a much larger conversation
Mhm.
about Miyazaki's legacy, about what storytelling even is, and what we as viewers, what we expect from a film, especially an animated film.
You're absolutely right. Miyazaki has always pushed the boundaries of what animation can be, and with The Boy and the Heron, he's done it again. He's asking us to engage with his work on this deeper level, to meet him in this space of ambiguity and interpretation.
So where does that leave us? Where does that leave us, the viewers? You've given us so much to think about, but I'm curious, what's your final takeaway?
Yeah.
Should we all rush out and see this film, even if it might leave us with more questions than answers?
Here's what I would say. If you are a fan of Miyazaki's work, even if you prefer his more straightforward films, The Boy and the Heron, it's still worth seeing. It's a visually stunning film. It really gives you a glimpse into the mind of a master storyteller. But go in with an open mind. Don't expect easy answers and don't expect to have everything explained perfectly. Allow yourself to get lost in that world that he's created. Embrace the ambiguity and find your own meaning in the heron's flight.
Beautifully said. And on that note of open-ended wonder, we come to the end of our deep dive into The Boy and the Heron. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of Miyazaki's latest film, and we encourage you to share your own thoughts, your own interpretations, maybe even your own dreamlike encounters with giant parakeets. Until next time, happy viewing.